Maya had always loved the ocean. As a little girl growing up in Singapore, she would spend hours watching documentaries about coral reefs and marine life. Her dream was simple. She wanted to study the underwater world and help protect it. After years of hard work in university, that dream finally seemed within reach. At 28, Maya was a skilled marine biologist with a passion for coral research. When she received an email about a research opportunity on Easter Island, she could hardly believe it. Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui, was one of the most remote places on Earth. Located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it was over 2,000 miles away from the nearest populated area. For Maya, this isolation made it perfect for studying how climate change was affecting coral reefs. The research grant seemed too good to be true. Dr. Rodriguez, a respected senior scientist, had personally invited her to join his team. The project would last 6 months, and Maya would have access to advanced equipment and unlimited research opportunities. She packed her bags with excitement, telling her family and friends that this would be the adventure of a lifetime. The journey to Easter Island took 2 full days of flying. Maya watched through the airplane window as endless blue ocean stretched in every direction. When the small island finally appeared below, dotted with the famous stone statues called moai, she felt a thrill of anticipation. This was it, her chance to make a real difference in marine science. The research station was small but well-equipped. It sat on a rocky cliff overlooking the ocean, with laboratories, living quarters, and communication equipment. Dr. Rodriguez welcomed Maya warmly and introduced her to the other team members. Everything seemed perfect. For the first 3 months, Maya threw herself into her work. She spent her days diving in the crystal-clear waters around the island, documenting coral health and collecting samples. The underwater world was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Colorful fish swam between healthy coral formations, and Maya felt like she was living in a nature documentary. She worked long hours, often staying late in the laboratory to analyze her findings. The data she was collecting would be crucial for understanding how remote coral reefs were adapting to changing ocean temperatures. Maya felt proud of her contribution to science and excited about the papers she would publish from this research. The other team members seemed friendly enough, though Maya noticed they often spoke in Spanish when she wasn't around. Dr. Rodriguez assured her this was normal and that she shouldn't worry about it. Maya trusted him completely. After all, he was an established scientist with an impressive reputation. Life on the island had its challenges. The isolation could be overwhelming at times. There were days when Maya missed her family and friends back home terribly. The internet connection was spotty at best, and phone calls to Singapore were expensive and often cut short by technical problems. But Maya reminded herself that this was temporary, and the research she was doing was worth the sacrifice. The supply boat came once a month, bringing fresh food, equipment, and mail from home. Maya always looked forward to these visits. The boat captain, a cheerful local man, would share news from the mainland and bring small gifts from the island's main town. These monthly visits were Maya's only real connection to the outside world. As her 4th month on the island began, Maya noticed that Dr. Rodriguez seemed increasingly nervous. He spent more time on phone calls behind closed doors and less time discussing research with the team. When Maya asked about their progress and when they might start preparing their findings for publication, Rodriguez gave vague answers and changed the subject. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, everything changed. Maya was in the laboratory examining coral samples when Dr. Rodriguez burst in, looking panicked. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he announced that there had been a serious problem with the research funding. The grant money was gone. He explained there had been some kind of administrative error, and the project was being shut down immediately. The research station would close, and everyone needed to leave as soon as possible. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. How could this happen so suddenly, within hours? The other team members were packing their equipment and personal belongings. Dr. Rodriguez made frantic phone calls, arranging for an emergency helicopter to evacuate the team. Maya watched in disbelief as months of careful research were hastily boxed up and prepared for transport. When the helicopter arrived the next morning, Maya ran toward it with her bags, ready to leave. But Dr. Rodriguez stopped her at the last moment. There wasn't enough room for her and all her research equipment, he explained. The helicopter was already overloaded. Another transport would come for her in a few days. He promised she just needed to wait at the station and keep the equipment safe until then. Maya hesitated. Something felt wrong about this situation, but she trusted Dr. Rodriguez. He was her mentor, the person who had given her this incredible opportunity. Surely he wouldn't leave her behind unless it was absolutely necessary. As the helicopter lifted off, Maya waved goodbye to her colleagues. Dr. Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the rotors that help would come soon. She just needed to be patient. Maya stood on the cliff, watching the helicopter disappear into the blue sky, carrying away the only people who knew she was on this remote island. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. No rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon. Maya's attempts to use the radio equipment failed. It had been damaged in a recent storm, and she didn't have the technical knowledge to repair it. The monthly supply boat wasn't due for another 2 weeks. Slowly, the horrible truth began to sink in. Maya checked the research station's files and discovered that Dr. Rodriguez had been stealing money from the grant for months. He hadn't just made an error. He had deliberately taken the funds for his own use. When the theft was discovered, he had fled, abandoning his research team and leaving Maya stranded on one of the most isolated places on Earth. Maya stood alone on the cliff where the helicopter had departed, staring out at the endless ocean. She was thousands of miles from home, with no way to communicate with the outside world, and no one knew exactly where she was. The research station had enough food and water for maybe 3 more weeks. After that, she would be completely on her own. For the first time since arriving on Easter Island, Maya felt truly afraid. The paradise she had dreamed of had become her prison, and she had no idea if anyone would ever come looking for her. The first week alone was the hardest. Maya woke up each morning hoping that yesterday had been a nightmare, that she would hear voices of her colleagues or the sound of a helicopter in the distance. But every morning brought the same crushing silence. The only sounds were the waves crashing against the rocks below, and the wind whistling through the research station. Maya had never been truly alone before. Back in Singapore, she lived with her family at university. She was surrounded by classmates and professors, even during her previous research trips. There had always been other people around. Now, the silence felt so heavy it was almost suffocating. She found herself talking out loud just to hear a human voice, even if it was her own. The research station felt different without other people. Rooms that had once been filled with laughter and conversation now echoed with every footstep. Maya tried to maintain her normal routine at first, working in the laboratory and analyzing data. But it felt pointless. Who would see her research now? Who would care about her discoveries if she never made it off this island? Food became her biggest worry. Maya counted and recounted the supplies in the station's pantry. Canned goods, dried rice, pasta, some frozen vegetables in the small freezer. If she was very careful, very disciplined, she might have enough for 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if she was willing to go hungry. She created a strict rationing system. 1 small meal in the morning, another in the evening. No snacks, no extra portions. No matter how hungry she felt, Maya wrote everything down in a notebook, tracking every can of beans, every cup of rice. The numbers didn't lie. Her food was disappearing faster than she wanted to admit. Water was another challenge. The research station had a small tank that collected rainwater, but it wasn't full. Maya learned to shower with just a cup of water, brushing her teeth with barely a sip. She placed every pot, pan, and container she could find outside to collect rainwater when the occasional storm passed through. The solar panels on the research station provided some electricity, but not much. Maya learned to live in near darkness, using lights only when absolutely necessary. She charged the station's radio every day, hoping against hope that she might pick up a signal or somehow get a message out. But the radio crackled with nothing but static. Either it was more damaged than she thought, or she was simply too far from civilization for anyone to hear her every morning. Maya climbed to the highest point near the research station. It was a rocky outcrop about a 10-minute walk from the main building. From there, she could see in all directions across the ocean. She would stand there for an hour, sometimes two, scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship or aircraft. Her eyes would play tricks on her, clouds that looked like sails, birds that seemed like helicopters in the distance. But day after day, the horizon remained empty. Maya tried to stay positive. She talked to herself constantly, narrating her actions like she was hosting her own nature documentary. "Now Maya's checking the rain collection containers," she would say, trying to make her voice sound cheerful. "Today looks like it might rain, which is excellent news for our water situation." The sound of her own voice helped fight off the overwhelming loneliness, even if it couldn't eliminate it completely. Her marine biology training proved more useful than she had expected. Maya knew about ocean ecosystems, and that knowledge helped her find food when her supplies began running dangerously low. She remembered studying tidal pools during her undergraduate years. The rocky shores around the research station were full of these small pools of seawater, and Maya discovered they contained a surprising variety of edible creatures. Small crabs scuttled between the rocks, mussels clung to the wet stones. Various types of seaweed grew in the pools and on the rocks below the tide line. Maya had never thought of these as food before, but hunger changed her perspective quickly. She learned to time her foraging with the low tide when more of the rocky shore was exposed. Catching the small crabs was surprisingly difficult at first. They were quick and seemed to disappear into tiny cracks in the rocks whenever she approached. Maya had to develop patience and technique. She learned to move slowly, to anticipate where the crabs would try to hide. Her hands got cut up on them sharp rocks, but she began to succeed in catching enough for small meals. The mussels were easier to collect but harder to prepare. Maya had to find sharp rocks to pry them open, and her first attempts were messy and wasteful. She burned her fingers trying to cook them over a small fire she built from driftwood. But gradually, she got better at it. The taste was strange and briny, nothing like the seafood restaurants back home. But it was protein, and it kept her alive. Seaweed became a regular part of her diet. Maya identified several types that she knew were edible from her biology studies. Some were salty and tough. Others had an almost sweet flavor. She learned to dry them in the sun to preserve them for later, creating a small stockpile of emergency food. The psychological challenges were often harder than the physical ones. Maya had always been a social person who drew energy from being around others. The isolation began affecting her in ways she hadn't expected. She would have full conversations with imaginary people, sometimes forgetting for moments that she was alone. She talked to the seabirds that visited the research station, giving them names and personalities. Sleep became difficult without the familiar sounds of civilization. Every noise seemed amplified and threatening. The wind rattling the research station's windows sounded like someone trying to break in. Waves crashing against the rocks below sounded like explosions. Maya often lay awake for hours, her mind racing with fears and scenarios. She tried to keep busy during the day to tire herself out. Maya organized and reorganized the research station, cleaned equipment she might never use again, and continued her observations of the local marine life, even though she knew no one might ever read her notes. The routine helped maintain her sanity. As weeks passed, Maya's body began to change. The limited food and constant stress took their toll. Her clothes became loose, her face thinner. She felt weak and tired most of the time, but somehow she kept going. Every morning, she climbed to her lookout point. Every day, she searched for food in the tidal pools. Every evening, she rationed her meager supplies and planned for tomorrow. Maya began to accept that rescue might not come. The monthly supply boat was her only hope. But she had no way of knowing if Dr. Rodriguez had canceled that service too. She started making plans for long-term survival, thinking about how she might signal for help if a plane happened to fly overhead, how she could preserve food for the rainy season, how she might make it through the colder months. But deep in her heart, Maya clung to hope. Someone, somewhere, had to know she was missing. Her family would worry when they didn't hear from her. The university would eventually ask questions about the research project. Somebody would come looking for her. She just had to survive long enough for them to find her. James had always been drawn to places where most people never went. As a documentary photographer from New Zealand, he spent his life capturing images of remote locations and forgotten stories. His camera had taken him to the peaks of the Himalayas, the depths of the Amazon rainforest, and now to one of the most isolated islands on Earth. Easter Island wasn't his first choice for this assignment. National Geographic had originally wanted him to photograph the famous Moai statues, the giant stone heads that made the island famous. James had seen hundreds of photos of those statues already. Every tourist who visited Easter Island took the same pictures from the same angles. He wanted something different, something that would tell a story no one else had told. That's how he ended up convincing his editor to let him explore the less visited parts of the island James wanted to find. Moai statues that tourists never saw, to capture the island's remote beauty from perspectives that hadn't been photographed 1,000 times before. It meant more challenging travel and higher costs, but James believed the results would be worth it. Finding a local guide willing to take him to the island's far side hadn't been easy. Most guides preferred to stick to the well-known sites near the main town of Hangaroa. The terrain on the other side of the island was rough and potentially dangerous. Finally, James found Mahina, an experienced local guide who knew the island's hidden secrets. Mahina was in his 50s, with weathered skin and hands that showed decades of outdoor work. He had grown up on Easter Island and knew every rock, every path, every dangerous cliff that tourists should avoid. When James explained his desire to photograph the remote areas, Mahina was hesitant at first. The other side of the island is not safe for visitors, Mahina had warned. The paths are difficult, and if something goes wrong, we are very far from help. But James was persistent, and eventually, Mahina agreed to guide him, though he insisted they bring extra safety equipment and emergency supplies. The journey to the remote side of Easter Island took them through landscapes that felt like another planet. Volcanic rock formations jutted up from grassy hills. Ancient stone platforms held Moai statues that few people had ever seen. The wind was constant and strong, making photography challenging but creating dramatic lighting conditions that James loved. On their first day exploring the remote areas, James was amazed by what they found. These Moai statues were different from the famous ones near Hangaroa. Some were partially buried by centuries of soil erosion. Others stood alone on cliff tops, staring out at the endless ocean. Each one had its own personality, its own story. Written in stone, James worked methodically, setting up his camera for each shot, waiting for the perfect light, capturing angles that revealed the mystery and majesty of these ancient sculptures. Mahina proved to be an excellent guide, not just for navigation, but for understanding the cultural significance of what they were photographing. My ancestors carved these statues, Mahina explained as they approached a particularly impressive group of Moai. Each one represents a chief or important person from our past. They were meant to protect the island and watch over our people. James found these stories as compelling as the visual beauty of the statues themselves. By their third day in the remote area, James had captured some of the best photographs of his career. The isolation and untouched beauty of this part of Easter Island created images that were both artistic and historically significant. He was already thinking about how these photos would look in the magazine spread when something unexpected caught his attention. James was setting up his telephoto lens to photograph a group of Moai near what appeared to be an abandoned building in the distance. The building looked out of place in this remote landscape, too modern, too industrial. Through his camera lens, James could see it was some kind of research station, probably used by scientists studying the island's ecology. As he focused his lens on the building, looking for interesting compositional elements to include with the Moai statues, James noticed movement. At first, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps one of the wild horses that roamed parts of the island. But as he adjusted his focus and zoomed in closer, he realized he was looking at a person. The figure was small and appeared to be moving slowly, almost stumbling. Even through the telephoto lens, James could see something was wrong. The person's movements were unsteady, and they seemed to be wearing torn, dirty clothing. James watched through his camera as the figure collapsed near a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile from the research station. "Mahina," James called to his guide, who was examining some ancient stone carvings nearby. "Come look at this. There's someone out there, and I think they're in trouble." Mahina hurried over and looked through James's camera lens. His expression immediately became serious. "That person is not moving right," he said. "Something is very wrong. But we are far from that place, and the ground between here and there is dangerous." James kept watching through his lens. The figure had gotten back up and was moving again, but every step looked like it required enormous effort. Whoever it was appeared to be extremely weak or injured. Through the powerful telephoto lens, James could see it was a young woman with long, dark hair. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and she moved like someone who was barely able to stay on her feet. "We have to help her," James said immediately. His background as a former military medic had taught him to recognize when someone was in serious medical distress, and everything he was seeing through his camera lens suggested this person was in real danger. Mahina looked worried. "The path to that place is very difficult. It will take us hours to get there, and we don't know what we will find. Maybe she is just a researcher who got lost. Maybe she has already called for help on her radio." But James couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The research station looked abandoned. No vehicles, no lights, no signs of normal activity. And the woman's movement suggested she was far beyond just being lost or tired. She was moving like someone who was starving, dehydrated, or seriously ill. "Look at her again," James said, handing the camera to Mahina. "Does that look like someone who just got lost on a day hike?" Mahina studied the scene through the telephoto lens for several long minutes. When he handed the camera back to James, his expression had changed. "You're right," he said quietly. "That person is in real trouble. If we don't help her, I don't think anyone else will." James quickly packed his photography equipment while Mahina gathered their emergency supplies. They had water, some food, a first aid kit, and emergency communication equipment. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to help whoever was out there. The journey to reach the mysterious woman would be dangerous and exhausting. They would have to climb down steep cliffs, cross unstable volcanic rock, and navigate terrain that could easily result in a twisted ankle or worse. But James had made his decision the moment he saw that figure collapse near the research station. As they began the treacherous journey toward the abandoned research station, James had no idea that he was about to encounter a woman who had been fighting for her life in complete isolation for over 2 months. Maya's incredible story of survival and abandonment was about to intersect with James's quest for the perfect photograph, creating a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The rescue that was about to unfold would test every skill James had learned as a medic, every bit of knowledge Mahina had gained from a lifetime on Easter Island, and every ounce of strength that Maya had left in her weakened body. The journey across the volcanic terrain felt like it took forever. James and Mahina moved as quickly as they dared, but the ground was treacherous. Sharp rocks threatened to slice through their boots, and loose stones shifted unexpectedly under their feet. Every step had to be calculated carefully to avoid a fall that could leave them stranded just like the person they were trying to reach. James's mind raced as they traveled. His years as a military medic had taught him to prepare for medical emergencies, but he had no idea what they would find when they reached the mysterious woman. Was she injured, sick, lost? The way she had been moving suggested something much more serious than a simple hiking accident. When they finally reached the spot where James had seen the figure collapse, they found Maya unconscious beside a large rock. James's heart sank when he saw her condition up close. She was severely underweight, her skin was pale and dry, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and she looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "Oh no," Mahena whispered. "This is very bad. How long has she been like this?" James knelt beside Maya and immediately began checking her vital signs, his medical training taking over. Her pulse was weak but steady. Her skin felt dry and hot. Classic signs of dehydration. When he gently lifted her eyelid, he could see that. Her eyes were sunken, another clear indicator that her body was desperately lacking fluids. "She's severely dehydrated," James told Mahena. "We need to get water into her system right away. But we have to be careful. Too much too fast could make her worse." James opened their emergency water supply and carefully dripped small amounts of water onto Maya's lips, hoping some would make it into her mouth. Maya stirred slightly at the touch of water, her body instinctively responding to what it needed. James continued the slow process of giving her tiny sips, supporting her head to help her swallow. After several minutes, Maya's eyes fluttered open, though she seemed confused and disoriented. "Where?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper, dry and cracked from weeks of limited water. She tried to sit up but immediately fell back down, too weak to support her own weight. "Don't try to move," James said gently. "My name is James, and this is Mahena. We're here to help you. You're safe now." Maya stared at them with confusion, as if she couldn't quite believe that other people were really there. After so many weeks alone, the presence of strangers felt almost like a dream. Mahena spread out a blanket from their supplies while James continued his assessment. Maya was clearly malnourished, probably hadn't had adequate food for weeks. Her hands were cut and scarred, likely from trying to find food in the rocky tidal pools. James could see that she had been fighting for survival for a long time. "What's your name?" James asked softly. "Can you tell us what happened to you?" "Maya," she managed to whisper. I was doing research. They left me here alone." Her words came out in fragments, but James and Mahena began to understand that this wasn't just someone who had gotten lost on a hike. Maya had been abandoned on this remote island, and she had been fighting for her life ever since. As Maya slowly sipped more water, she began to tell them her story in broken sentences. The research project, Dr. Rodriguez's betrayal, being left behind with no way to communicate with the outside world. James and Mahena listened in shock as the full scope of Maya's ordeal became clear. "How long have you been alone?" Mahena asked, his voice filled with sympathy. 2 months, Maya replied, and James felt his stomach drop. 2 months of complete isolation on one of the most remote places on Earth. The fact that Maya was still alive was nothing short of miraculous. James knew they needed to get Maya to proper medical care as quickly as possible, but first they had to stabilize her condition enough for travel. The journey back to Hangaroa would take at least 3 days across difficult terrain, and Maya was too weak to walk even a few steps. "We're going to take care of you," James assured her, "but we need to get you stronger before we can move you to safety. Are you hurt anywhere? Any injuries we should know about?" Maya shook her head weakly. "Just tired, so tired and hungry." James gave her small pieces of energy bar from their supplies, making sure she ate slowly to avoid overwhelming her digestive system. Her body accepted the food gratefully, and James could see a tiny bit of color returning to her cheeks. The biggest challenge would be getting Maya across the dangerous terrain between their current location and the main settlement. She couldn't walk more than a few steps without collapsing, and carrying her the entire way would be nearly impossible for just 2 people. James and Mahena would need to improvise a way to transport her safely. Working together, they created a makeshift stretcher using James's photography tripod, their spare clothing, and some rope from Mahena's pack. It wasn't perfect, but it would allow them to carry Maya while distributing her weight between both men. The stretcher would make their journey much more difficult, but it was the only way to get Maya to safety. As the sun began to set on their first day together, James and Mahena set up a small camp near the abandoned research station. Maya was still too weak to travel, but she was stable and slowly improving with regular water and small amounts of food. The 3 of them spent the night under the stars, with James and Mahena taking turns keeping watch over Maya. During the long hours of darkness, Maya shared more details of her incredible survival story. She told them about learning to catch crabs in the tidal pools, about collecting rainwater in every container she could find, about the crushing loneliness of weeks without human contact. James was amazed by her resourcefulness and determination. "I thought I was going to die here," Maya admitted as they prepared for the difficult journey ahead. "I kept hoping someone would come, but as time went on, I started to accept that maybe no one would ever find me. I can't believe you're real. I can't believe you found me." The next morning, they began the challenging journey back to civilization. Maya's condition had improved enough that she could stay conscious and alert, but she still needed to be carried most of the way. James and Mahina took turns supporting the stretcher, stopping frequently to rest and give Maya water and small amounts of food. The journey was exhausting for all three of them. The volcanic terrain that had been challenging for the healthy men became nearly impossible when carrying a third person. They had to navigate around deep crevices, climb over rocky barriers, and carefully descend steep slopes while keeping Maya secure on the improvised stretcher. But with each mile they traveled, Maya grew a little stronger. By the second day, she was able to walk short distances with support from James and Mahina. Her spirits seemed to lift as they got closer to safety, and she began to believe that her nightmare was finally coming to an end. On the third day of their journey, they could see the lights of Hangaroa in the distance. Maya cried when she saw signs of civilization again, the first tears she had shed since her rescue began, after months of complete isolation. The sight of houses and people felt like the most beautiful thing in the world. James and Mahina had saved Maya's life, but more than that, they had restored her faith in humanity in her darkest hour, when she had been abandoned and left to die. Complete strangers had risked their own safety to rescue her. The kindness of these two men proved that even in the most remote corners of the world, compassion and courage could triumph over cruelty and abandonment. When James, Mahina, and Maya finally reached the small medical clinic in Hangaroa, the entire community was shocked by Maya's story. Dr. Patricia, the clinic's only doctor, had seen many cases of dehydration and malnutrition from tourists who underestimated the island's harsh conditions, but nothing like this. Maya's survival after 2 months of complete isolation was medically remarkable. The clinic was basic, but well-equipped for a remote location. Dr. Patricia immediately started Maya on for fluids to address her severe dehydration. Maya's body responded quickly to proper medical care, and within hours she was feeling more alert and stronger than she had in weeks. The simple pleasure of lying in a clean bed, with fresh water available whenever she wanted it, felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. News of Maya's rescue spread through Hangaroa like wildfire. The island's population was small, and everyone knew everyone else. The story of a scientist who had been abandoned and left to die was both shocking and heartbreaking to the tight-knit community. People began stopping by the clinic to check on Maya and offer support. Local families brought homemade food. Knowing that Maya hadn't had a proper meal in months, the island's mayor visited personally to hear her story and promised that authorities would be contacted immediately. Children drew pictures for her, and elders shared stories of the island's history to help her feel connected to the place that had nearly become her grave. Maya was overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. After months of believing that she had been forgotten by the world, the outpouring of support from people she had never met was deeply moving. She had expected to feel bitter and angry about her experience, but instead she found herself grateful for the reminder that most people were fundamentally good. James extended his stay on Easter Island to document Maya's recovery and the community's response to her story. What had started as a photography assignment about ancient statues had become something much more meaningful, a story about human resilience, compassion, and the power of strangers to change each other's lives. James's photographs of Maya's rescue and recovery were unlike anything he had ever captured. They showed not just the dramatic landscape of Easter Island, but the human drama that had unfolded there. The images of Maya's gradual return to health, surrounded by the caring people of Hangaroa, told a story that words alone couldn't convey. As Maya grew stronger, she worked with Chilean authorities to provide a detailed account of Dr. Rodriguez's actions. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of his fraud and abandonment. Rodriguez had not only stolen research funds, but had deliberately canceled the supply boat service to the research station, knowing that Maya would be left stranded without resources. The international scientific community was horrified by Rodriguez's actions. Universities and research institutions around the world immediately began reviewing their safety protocols for remote research projects. Maya's experience exposed dangerous gaps in protection for researchers working in isolated locations. Rodriguez was eventually found in Brazil, where he had been living under a false name using the stolen research funds. He was arrested and extradited to Chile to face charges of fraud, embezzlement, and abandonment. The legal proceedings would take years, but Maya took some satisfaction in knowing that he would be held accountable for his actions. More importantly, Maya's story led to real changes in how remote research was conducted. New international guidelines required multiple emergency communication systems, regular check-ins with home institutions, and mandatory emergency evacuation plans. Maya's suffering had at least ensured that other researchers would be better protected. In the future, during her recovery on Easter Island, Maya formed deep friendships with both James and Mahina. James's decision to venture into remote areas for his photography had saved her life, and she would forever be grateful for his willingness to help a stranger in distress. Mahina's knowledge of the island and his cultural wisdom had been just as crucial to her rescue. The three of them spent many evenings together, talking about their lives and experiences. Maya learned about James's adventures around the world and his passion for documenting stories that might otherwise be forgotten. James learned about Maya's dedication to marine science and her dreams of protecting ocean ecosystems. Mahina shared stories of Easter Island's history and culture, helping both James and Maya understand the deep connection between the island's people and their environment. As Maya regained her strength, she insisted on visiting the research station where she had spent those terrible months alone. James and Mahina accompanied her on the journey, which felt completely different now that she was healthy and had companions. The station that had been her prison now seemed small and insignificant compared to the vast beauty of the island around it. Maya collected her research notes and equipment, salvaging what she could of the work she had done before Rodriguez's betrayal. Surprisingly, much of her data was still intact and scientifically valuable. Her observations of coral reef health in such a remote location would contribute to important research on climate change impacts, giving meaning to the suffering she had endured. James's documentation of Maya's story won several international photography awards and was featured in magazines around the world. The images brought global attention to Easter Island and its people, leading to increased tourism and economic opportunities for the local community. James donated a portion of his earnings from the story to fund local education and healthcare improvements. Maya's foundation for researcher safety became a major force in the scientific community. She traveled the world speaking about her experience and advocating for better protection of researchers in remote locations. Her work helped establish emergency communication networks, mandatory safety training, and international protocols for remote research projects. 2 years after her rescue, Maya returned to Easter Island as a visiting scientist. This time, she came not as a victim but as a collaborator, working with local communities on sustainable marine conservation projects. The island that had nearly claimed her life became a place of healing and new purpose. James continued to document stories of human resilience around the world, but he never forgot the moment that changed his perspective on the power of photography to make a real difference in people's lives. His chance decision to explore remote areas of Easter Island had saved a life and inspired changes that would protect countless others. Mahina became something of a local hero, known throughout the Pacific Islands for his role in Maya's rescue. His story inspired other guides and community members to be aware of people in distress and to be willing to take risks to help others. The values of compassion and community support that had always been part of Easter Island culture were strengthened by Maya's story. Maya's experience taught her that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone as long as there are people willing to extend compassion to strangers. The cruelty of one person, Dr. Rodriguez, had been overcome by the kindness of many. James and Mahena had risked their own safety to save her, and the entire community of Hangaroa had welcomed her as family. The research station where Maya had fought for survival was eventually converted into an emergency shelter and communication hub for the remote areas of Easter Island. A plaque near the entrance tells the story of Maya's survival and rescue, ensuring that visitors understand the importance of safety and preparation. When exploring remote locations, Maya's story became a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit and the power of strangers to change each other's lives. In a world that can often seem cruel and indifferent, her experience proved that compassion, courage, and community can triumph over abandonment and despair. Sometimes, the most profound connections are formed when people choose to help others, even when there's nothing in it for them except the knowledge that they've done the right thing.